My name is Emily Carter, and I was 37 years old when my brother used a medical power of attorney to erase me from my mother's hospital room. I rushed to St. Mary's after a nurse left a message saying Mom had been admitted overnight. But when I reached the front desk, my brother Daniel was already there with a folder in his hand. He looked at the receptionist and said, "She's not allowed back. Mom doesn't want to see her." I stood there in the lobby with my coat still wet from the rain while everyone stared. Security walked me outside like I was a stranger causing trouble. For 2 days, I believed my own mother had rejected me while she was dying. Then the hospital's patient advocate called and said, "Ms. Carter, we found something in your mother's chart that was addressed to you." It was a sealed letter, and when the charge nurse read the first line, my brother stopped talking. The rain was coming down so hard that morning, I could barely see the entrance to St. Dater. Mary's through my windshield. I had driven 40 minutes after getting a voicemail from a nurse I didn't know. "Miss Tech Carter, your mother was admitted overnight. Please call the hospital." That was all she said. No details. No explanation. Just enough to make my hands shake while I grabbed my coat and drove across town. My mother and I were not close. Not in the way daughters are supposed to be close to their mothers. But she was still my mother. Whatever had happened between us, I did not want her alone in a hospital bed, inside the lobby. Everything smelled like disinfectant, wet coats, and burnt coffee from the vending machine. I walked straight to the front desk and gave my mother's name. Linda Carter. She was admitted last night. The receptionist typed for a moment. Then her expression changed. "And your relationship. I'm her daughter, Emily Carter." She looked at the screen again. Then toward the hallway behind her. "Please wait here." That was when I saw Daniel. My brother was standing near the elevators in a dark jacket, holding a folder against his chest like it gave him authority over the whole building. He did not look surprised to see me. That was my first warning. Daniel walked to the desk before the receptionist could speak. "She's not allowed back," he said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Mom doesn't want to see her." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He opened the folder just enough for the receptionist to see a document clipped inside. "I have medical power of attorney." Then he looked at me. Not with grief. Not with concern. But with the same expression he used when we were children, and he had convinced our parents something was my fault. "You should go home. Emily, this is already hard enough." I tried to step around him. "I want to hear that from Mom." Daniel moved in front of me. "She can barely speak." "Then let me sit with her." His jaw tightened. "You always do this. You make everything about you." The receptionist looked uncomfortable. A man in the waiting area lowered his magazine. Someone near the vending machine turned to watch. I felt every eye on me. And suddenly, I wasn't just a daughter trying to see her sick mother. I was a disturbance in a hospital lobby. Daniel turned to the receptionist and said, louder this time, "Please call security. My mother specifically does not want this visitor." Security came faster than I expected. 2 officers. Polite but firm. One asked me to lower my voice. Even though Daniel had been the one speaking loudly, I said, "I'm her daughter." Daniel lifted the folder again. "And I'm the person legally responsible for her care." That sentence landed like a door closing. The officer softened a little but still guided me toward the exit. "Ma'am, until this is clarified, you'll need to step outside." I looked back once, hoping Daniel would flinch, hoping the receptionist would question him, hoping someone would say that a piece of paper did not erase a daughter. Nobody did. Outside, rain hit my face before I reached the curb. I stood under the overhang with my phone in my hand, shaking too hard to unlock it. Through the glass doors, I saw Daniel speaking to the receptionist again. He placed one more paper on the counter, and she nodded slowly. I could not read the document from where I stood, but I saw the heading in bold letters when he turned it slightly. Visitor restriction request. My name was written underneath. Emily Carter. For the first time. I wondered if my mother had really asked for that, or if Daniel had simply learned how to make a hospital believe she did. 6 months before that morning at St. Revan, Mary's, my mother called me on a Sunday evening and asked if I still had the same phone number. It was such a strange question that I laughed at first. "Mom? You just called it." She didn't laugh back. There was a pause. Then the sound of a television somewhere behind her turned low. "I mean, if something happened," she said, "would this number still reach you?" I was standing in my kitchen cutting vegetables for dinner, and the knife stopped halfway through a carrot. "What kind of something?" she sighed. "Don't start interrogating me. Emily, I'm just asking." That was my mother's way. She would open a door 1 inch, then punish you for noticing there was a room behind it. 2 days later, I drove to her house with groceries because she had mentioned feeling tired. Daniel's car was already in the driveway. That surprised me. My brother rarely came by unless there was a form to sign, a repair he wanted Dad to handle, or some problem he believed our mother could solve for him. When I walked in, he was sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers spread in front of him. Mom looked up quickly and closed a folder. "Emily," she said, too brightly, "I didn't know you were coming." I lifted the grocery bags. "You asked me to bring soup and bread." Daniel smiled without standing. "She forgets things lately." I didn't like how he said it. Not concerned. Useful. I asked Mom if she was okay. She waved me off, but her hand trembled slightly when she reached for her water glass. On the top of Daniel's stack, I saw the words, "Medical Power of Attorney," before he slid another paper over it. "Is that what this is about?" I asked. Daniel leaned back. "Mom wants her affairs organized." "Then why didn't she call both of us?" He tilted his head. "Because not everything requires a committee." Mom stared at the table. That bothered me more than Daniel's answer. My mother had never been afraid to argue with me, but that night she looked tired in a way I had never seen before, as if the argument had already happened before I arrived. When Daniel went outside to take a call, Mom reached across the table and touched my wrist. "If I'm ever in the hospital," she said quietly, "I don't believe everything you're told in the hallway." I looked toward the back door where Daniel had gone. "What does that mean?" Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "It means people sound very certain when they are holding paperwork." Before I could ask more, Daniel came back in and her hand slipped away from mine. He smiled at both of us. "Everything okay?" Mom picked up her water glass. "Fine," she said, but her voice did not sound fine. I left that night with a knot in my stomach. A week later, Mom mailed me a birthday card, even though my birthday was still 2 months away. Inside, she had written only one line: "Keep this somewhere safe, just in case I am not allowed to say it later." There was no explanation. No second page. No letter. Just that sentence. I called her immediately, but Daniel answered her phone. "She's resting," he said. "You can talk to her another time." Another time became the phrase I heard for months. Every time I called, Mom was sleeping, resting, with a doctor, or too tired. And every time Daniel said it, I heard my mother's warning again. Don't believe everything you're told in the hallway. Daniel had always known how to make paperwork sound like morality. He was 40 years old, divorced, polished, and the kind of man who could say hospital policy with enough confidence that people stopped asking whether he actually understood it. My parents called him practical. Relatives called him responsible. I called him what he was only in my own head, someone who learned very early that if he held the folder, everyone assumed he held the truth. The first time I saw him use that trick was during a family dinner in March. Mom had been tired for weeks. Pale, in a way that makeup could not cover. And when I asked whether she wanted me to go with her to the specialist, Daniel answered before she could. "I'm already handling it." I looked at him. I asked Mom. He smiled, reached into the leather folder beside his plate, and pulled out a form. "And Mom has chosen me as her medical power of attorney, so there's no need to confuse the process." He placed the form on the table just long enough for everyone to see the heading, then covered the signature page with his hand. That small movement stayed with me. The way he showed the title, but hid the signature. The way Mom stared down at her plate instead of correcting him. The way Dad nodded like a document had solved the entire question of love. A power of attorney doesn't mean Mom can't speak for herself, I said. Daniel's smile thinned. "Emily, this is exactly why she didn't want a committee. You turn everything into conflict." Mom's fork paused. For 1 second, I thought she might say my name. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe later." Daniel folded the form and slid it back into his folder like closing a door. After dinner, Mom followed me into the hallway while Daniel was outside on a call. She moved slowly, one hand on the wall, and pressed a folded paper into my palm. "Don't read it here," she whispered. "Mom, what is this?" Her eyes flicked toward the patio door. "Just keep it. And if Daniel says I refused you, ask Angela." Before I could ask who Angela was, Daniel came back inside. Mom stepped away from me so quickly it looked rehearsed. Daniel glanced from her to me. "Everything okay?" he asked. Mom nodded. "Fine." But her voice sounded like a woman answering under supervision. I opened the paper in my car. It was a copy of an appointment card from St. Tita's, Mary's neurology clinic. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, was a name and extension, Nurse Angela Morris. Ext. 417. Under that, she had written one sentence. "If I am listed as refusing visitors, ask who entered it." I read that sentence until the ink blurred. Refusing visitors. Not if I'm sick. Not if I forget. She was talking about the hospital record before there even was a hospital room. The next morning, I called the extension. Angela Morris did not give me medical information, and I respected that. But when I gave her my name, her voice changed slightly. "Your mother told me you might call." I gripped the phone. "Did she say why?" Angela paused. She said, "You ask the questions people wish you wouldn't." Then, more carefully, she added, "A medical power of attorney is important, Ms. Carter. But it does not erase a patient's current wishes while that patient can still communicate." That was not a diagnosis. It was not a disclosure. It was a warning wrapped in policy. By the time Mom was admitted to St. Mary's, Daniel had convinced everyone he was the only person who knew what she wanted. But I had the appointment card. I had Angela's name. I had Mom's handwritten warning. And after security escorted me out of the hospital lobby, I sat in my car in the rain and finally understood why Mom had hidden that note in my hand. Daniel was not just holding paperwork. He was preparing to make the paperwork speak louder than her. The first time Nurse Angela Morris called me, it was from a blocked number on a Thursday afternoon. I almost ignored it because Daniel had started using unknown numbers and relatives to pass messages. But something made me answer. "Emily Carter," a woman asked. "This is Angela Morris from St. Mary's." I stood up so quickly my chair scraped the floor. "Is my mother okay?" Angela's voice stayed low. "She's stable. I can't discuss medical details over the phone. But your mother asked me to confirm something with you." My hand tightened around the phone. "What?" Angela paused. "Do you still have the appointment card she gave you?" I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the card with Angela's name on the back. "Yes," I said. Angela exhaled softly. "Good. Then listen carefully. Your mother asked to see you twice this week. Both times. Daniel said, you were not to be contacted because you were emotionally disruptive." I felt the room tilt. "Did my mother say that?" "No." Angela said, "That is why I entered a nursing note." She lowered her voice further. The note states that the patient verbally requested Emily Carter be notified, and Emily Carter, while medical power of attorney representative objected. I wrote the sentence down with shaking hands. Then Angela said, "There's more. A visitor restriction request appeared in the chart the same afternoon. But it wasn't signed by your mother. And it wasn't entered by a physician." My breath caught. "Who entered it?" Angela didn't answer directly. "That is exactly the question you need to ask the patient advocate. Not the front desk. Not security. Patient advocacy." Before hanging up, she added, "Your mother left a sealed envelope with me. I can't release it yet. But if the chart is reviewed, that may change." Then the line went dead. I sat at my kitchen table with the appointment card, the birthday card, and a blank folder in front of me. On the folder tab, I wrote Mom Hospital Records. Into it went scans of the birthday card, the appointment card, Daniel's massage, the voicemail from St. Renine, Mary's, and the notes I had just taken from Angela's call. I did not know yet whether I was building a case or simply trying to prove to myself I was not crazy. But I knew this Daniel had said Mom didn't want me there. Angela's nursing note said Mom had asked for me. Both could not be true. That evening, Daniel texted me, "Stop calling the hospital. You're upsetting Mom." I saved it. 1 minute later, he sent another. "I have POA. The staff knows not to discuss anything with you." I saved that too. Then a third message came in. "If you show up again, security will remove you again." For the first time since the lobby, I did not feel ashamed. I felt the story turning. Daniel thought the paperwork ended the conversation. He didn't understand that paperwork also leaves fingerprints. I returned to St. Loden. Mary's the next morning through the patient advocacy entrance. Not the main lobby, where Daniel had turned me into a problem in front of strangers. The office was small and quiet, tucked behind the outpatient wing with pale blue walls. A printer humming in the corner, and a framed sign that said, "Every patient has the right to be heard." A woman in her 60s stood when I entered. Her badge read Karen Mitchell. Patient advocate. I gave her my name. Placed Mom's birthday card, the appointment card, and my notes from Angela's call on her desk, and said, "I need to know whether my mother actually refused to see me, or whether my brother made the hospital believe she did." Karen read everything without interrupting. Then she looked up and asked the first useful question anyone had asked since Mom was admitted. "Did any doctor, nurse, or staff member tell you that your mother personally said she did not want you here?" I shook my head. "Only Daniel." Karen wrote that down. Then we start with the chart. Not the family story. She called the charge nurse, requested the visitor activity log. And 20 minutes later, a nurse came in with a tablet. She opened the file, scrolled, and stopped. Her face changed. Karen leaned closer. "What is it?" The nurse turned the screen slightly. Under my name were 2 words, "Access denied." My throat tightened. Who entered that? The nurse tapped the screen again. "It only shows the restriction here. I'd need the audit history to see who requested or entered it." Karen's voice stayed calm. "Bullet." The nurse hesitated. "That's usually compliance." Karen folded her hands. "Then consider this a compliance concern." 10 minutes later, the nurse came back with a printed page. Under authorized by. One line had been highlighted. Entered following request presented by medical power of attorney representative. Pending verification. No physician signature. No patient statement. No nursing confirmation. Just Daniel. A folder. And a hospital system that had believed the loudest paper in the room. Karen read the line twice. Then she looked at me and said, "Emily, I'm going to involve compliance. If your mother requested you and someone blocked access without proper verification, this is no longer a family disagreement." My phone buzzed before I could answer. Daniel. One text. "Leave the hospital now." I turned the screen toward Karen. She looked at it. Then at the report on her desk. "Save that," she said. He just made our timeline easier. Karen Mitchell was still holding my phone when Daniel's text lit up the screen again. "Leave the hospital now." For a moment. None of us spoke. The charge nurse looked at Karen. Karen looked at the printed audit report on her desk. Then back at my phone. "He shouldn't know you're here," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Karen turned the phone toward the nurse. "Patient advocacy does not notify family members when someone comes to this office." The nurse's face changed. "I didn't call him." Karen picked up her office phone and pressed one button. "Compliance. Please. Now." 10 minutes later, a man named David Ellis came in wearing a hospital badge with compliance officer printed beneath his name. Karen handed him the visitor log, the audit page, and my phone. He read Daniel's message without expression, then asked, "When did you arrive?" I told him. "Who saw you enter?" I looked toward the hallway. "The front desk near patient advocacy." "Maybe one volunteer." David wrote that down. "And your brother texted within minutes of us accessing the visitor restriction record." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Are you saying someone told him David did not answer directly?" "I'm saying the timing is a concern." Then Angela Morris appeared in the doorway. She looked tired. Like someone who had spent too many hours trying to do the right thing quietly. When she saw me, her expression softened. "Emily." Karen nodded for her to come in. David asked Angela to explain the nursing note. Angela stood beside the desk and said, "Mrs. Carter asked twice whether Emily had been called. The first time, Daniel said Emily would upset her. The second time, Mrs. Carter said, 'I want my daughter. Not later.' Now, I documented it because the request was clear. My throat closed. Not later. Now. Those were my mother's words. And for 2 days, Daniel had made me believe she had rejected me. David asked, "Was Mrs. Carter oriented when she made that request?" Angela answered immediately, "Yes." She knew her name, location, that, and why she was admitted. She was tired. But she was able to express preference. David wrote again. "Was there any physician order restricting Emily Carter?" Angela shook her head. "No." "Any patient-signed visitor refusal?" "No." "Any behavioral incident involving Emily Carter?" Before the restriction, Angela looked at me. Then back at him. "No, she had not been allowed upstairs." Every no felt like a door unlocking. My phone buzzed again. This time Daniel called. Karen told me not to answer. David asked if he could document the call attempt. I nodded. While the phone rang, Angela reached into the pocket of her scrub jacket and pulled out a small sealed envelope. She placed it on the desk but kept one hand over it. "This is what Linda gave me yesterday morning," she said. "She asked me to keep it until Emily was allowed to receive it." My eyes went to the handwriting on the front. Emily. Just my name. David looked at Angela. "Do not release it yet," he said. "We need to clear the restriction first." Angela nodded. But her hand stayed near the envelope like she was afraid it might disappear. Then David said the sentence that changed everything. Until this is reviewed, the visitor restriction is suspended. Karen looked at him. Meaning, he turned to me. Meaning, you may see your mother. With nursing staff present. Unless she personally tells us otherwise. I stood so quickly, the chair hit the wall behind me. My phone stopped ringing. Daniel texted one final time. If you go upstairs, you'll regret it. David read it. Circled something on his notes. And said, actually, that helps. Karen opened the office door. Come on. Emily, she said. Let's go ask your mother what she wants. Karen walked on my left. David on my right. And Angela a few steps ahead of us, carrying the sealed envelope against her clipboard. We took the staff elevator instead of the public one. No one said much. The quiet was worse than talking because every floor number that lit up felt like a countdown. For 2 days, I had believed my mother did not want me near her. For 2 days, Daniel had stood between us with a folder and the word policy. Now, the same hospital that had escorted me into the rain was walking me toward her room with a patient advocate, a compliance officer, and a nurse who had written down the truth before anyone else believed it. When we reached Mom's floor, Daniel was standing near the nurse's station. Of course he was. His face changed the second he saw me. First shock, then anger, then that polished calm he used when strangers were watching. What is she doing here? He asked. David stepped forward. The visitor restriction is under review and temporarily suspended. Daniel lifted his folder. I have medical power of attorney. David didn't flinch. We have reviewed that document. It does not override a capable patient's expressed wish to see a visitor. Daniel looked at Angela. You had no right. Angela held his Kaza. Your mother asked for her daughter. For once. Daniel had no quick answer. Karen turned to me and said, Emily, we're going to enter first and ask your mother directly. No one will coach her. No one will answer for her. Daniel tried to follow. David stopped him with one hand. You'll wait here. My brother's jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. David looked down at the notes in his hand. So was texting Ms. Carter to leave a hospital office you weren't notified she was in. Daniel went pale enough that even the charge nurse noticed. Inside the room, Mom looked smaller than I had prepared myself for. She was propped against white pillows. Oxygen tubing under her nose. Gray hair brushed back from her face. Machines beeped softly beside the bed. For a second, every complicated thing between us disappeared. And she was simply my mother. Sick and tired and looking at the door like she had been waiting for it to open. Karen approached first. Linda, this is Karen from Patient Advocacy. I need to ask you something clearly. Do you want Emily here? Mom's eyes moved from Karen to me. Her mouth trembled. Then she reached one thin hand toward me. I asked for her. She whispered. I kept asking. I crossed the room so fast Angela had to move the chair out of my way. I took Mom's hand, and she started crying. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like she was too exhausted to do anything else. I thought you didn't come, she said. They told me you didn't come. My chest hurt so badly I could barely breathe. I came. I said. I came the first day. Her fingers tightened weakly around mine. Daniel said you left. Karen and David exchanged a glance. Angela wrote something in the chart. The paper war had just become human. Mom looked toward the doorway, where Daniel was visible through the glass panel, pacing near the nurse's station. He said he was protecting me from stress. She whispered, but I wanted you. I pressed her hand against my cheek. I'm here now. She nodded, then looked at Angela. The envelope. Angela stepped forward, but waited for David's nod. He gave it. Angela placed the sealed envelope in Mom's lap. Mom touched the front with shaking fingers. "I wrote this before surgery," she said, "in case he made them believe I didn't want you." Then she looked at me with more clarity than I had seen in years. "Don't let him tell my story for me." Mom did not let go of my hand while Angela opened the sealed envelope. David stood near the foot of the bed, Karen beside him with her notebook open. And Daniel watched through the glass like a man realizing the room had continued without his permission. Angela unfolded the letter slowly. The paper was hospital stationery, dated the morning before my first visit. Mom's handwriting was uneven but clear. "Emily, if you are reading this, then Daniel has done what I feared. He has mistaken permission to help me for permission to control me. I want you here. I wanted you called. If anyone says otherwise, check the chart." Angela stopped reading for a moment because Mom had started crying again. Karen handed me a tissue, but I couldn't take it. I was still holding Mom's hand with both of mine. David asked Angela to continue. The next line was even sharper. "I am tired. I am scared. But I am not confused about my daughter. Daniel may handle forms, but he does not own my voice." David looked down at the visitor restriction report in his folder. Karen wrote something quickly. Angela's face stayed professional, but her eyes were wet. Then David asked to review the chart at the bedside. A computer on wheels was brought into the room. Angela looked in, and David stood beside her as she pulled up the relevant notes. I watched the screen as each entry appeared like pieces of a story Daniel had not expected anyone to read in order. 8:42 a.m. Patient asks whether daughter Emily has been notified. 9:10 a.m. Medical POA representative states Emily should not be contacted due to family conflict. 11:37 a.m. Patient repeats request to see Emily Carter. 11:45 a.m. Nursing note entered, documenting patient request. 12:00 a.m. Visitor restriction request added pending verification. Karen looked at David. "Pending verification," she said. "Was it ever verified?" David scrolled. "No physician order. No patient refusal statement. No behavioral incident. No signed visitor limitation. Just Daniel's request, sitting in the chart like a fact, because no one had challenged it in time." Mom closed her eyes. I asked. She whispered. "I know," I said. David turned to me and said, "Ms. Carter, the record supports that your mother requested you before the restriction was entered." I looked through the glass at Daniel. He was no longer pacing. He was standing still, watching David read. Then Angela opened one final note from the night before. Patient states, "If Emily comes, please don't let Daniel send her away again." The room went completely quiet. Even the monitor seemed louder. My mother turned her face toward me. "I thought maybe you stopped trying," she said. I shook my head. I was outside in the rain. Her grip tightened. "I'm sorry. It was not a perfect apology for our whole life. It did not heal every old wound, but it was the truth in the only moment that mattered. She had wanted me there." David closed the chart and looked toward the hallway. "I need to speak with Daniel now." Karen stayed with Mom while Angela walked me to the doorway. Daniel straightened when he saw us coming. David stepped out with the printed record in his hand. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we need to discuss the difference between holding medical power of attorney and overriding a capable patient's stated wishes." Daniel opened his mouth. But for once, the folder in his hand did not make him look powerful. It made him look exposed. Daniel followed David Ellis into a private conference room just off the medical floor. But the door remained slightly open. Karen asked me to stay in the family waiting area with Mom while the compliance office reviewed the documentation. I wanted to hear every word, every explanation, every excuse Daniel would invent. but Karen gently shook her head. "Emily," she said, "today isn't about winning an argument. It's about protecting your mother's rights." That sentence stayed with me because it sounded exactly like something a hospital should exist to do. Yet, for the past 2 days, no one had protected those rights at all. Mom looked exhausted after everything that had happened. Angela adjusted her blanket and checked her medication before quietly stepping out. I pulled my chair closer to the bed. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people trying to understand how much time had been stolen from them. Finally, Mom squeezed my hand. "How many times did you come?" she asked softly. "Twice," I answered. "The first day security walked me outside. Yesterday I tried again through patient advocacy." Tears gathered in her eyes. "Daniel told me you never came." I closed my eyes for a second. "He told me you never wanted me." We sat there holding hands, each of us realizing we had been grieving the same lie from opposite sides of the same hospital. Nearly 40 minutes later, Karen returned carrying a thick blue compliance folder. Behind her walked David Ellis with another stack of documents clipped together. His expression was calm, but much more serious than before. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "we've completed our preliminary review." Mom nodded weakly. "Tell me the truth." David opened the folder and placed several documents on the bedside table where both of us could see them. The visitor restriction request was entered without verification of your wishes. Our policy requires staff to confirm restrictions directly with a capable patient whenever possible. He pointed to another page. That verification never happened. He continued laying out the timeline. Every document told part of the story. Angela's nursing note, documenting Mom's request to see me. The visitor restriction request, submitted through Daniel as medical power of attorney. The audit history showing the restriction remained marked as pending verification for almost 36 hours. The visitor log recording my access denial. The security report documenting my removal from the lobby. None of the papers alone proved misconduct. Together, they told a story no one in the room could ignore. David turned another page. "There's something else." He handed Karen a printed email from the hospital's internal messaging system. About 20 minutes after the visitor restriction was entered, someone sent a message to the nursing station reminding staff that all family communication should go through Mr. and 40. Daniel Carter. Karen frowned. "Who authorized that?" David looked down at the page. "No physician. No attending nurse. It appears to have been entered based solely on the restriction request before verification was completed." Karen slowly removed her glasses. "So an unverified restriction changed the way staff communicated with the entire family." David nodded. "Yes. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, I felt anger replacing confusion. Not because mistakes had been made. Hospitals are full of human beings. And human beings make mistakes. What hurt was how easily one confident voice holding paperwork had become more believable than the patient lying in the bed. Mom watched David quietly. "Did anyone ask me?" she whispered. David met her eyes. "No. Mrs. Carter. They should have. They didn't." He didn't make excuses. That honesty mattered more than an apology. A soft knock interrupted the room. Another woman entered wearing a navy blazer with Hospital Ethics Committee printed beneath her identification badge. "I'm Rebecca Lawson," she said. "I've reviewed the initial compliance findings." She introduced herself to Mom first, then to me. A small gesture that somehow restored a little dignity. Rebecca placed one final document on the bedside table, effective immediately. "The visitor restriction has been permanently removed from your medical record." She paused before adding, "We've also initiated a formal review of how this occurred. Your wishes, Mrs. Carter, will now be documented directly by your care team without intermediaries." Mom nodded slowly. "Thank you." Rebecca smiled gently. then looked toward the hallway where Daniel was still waiting with his folder. "There's one issue we still need to resolve," she said. "Mr. Carter insists that his medical power of attorney gave him authority to make these decisions." David closed the compliance folder and looked at Rebecca. She nodded once before turning back to us. "That's the next conversation." She picked up a copy of the medical power of attorney from the folder and said quietly, "Because I don't believe Mr. Brosonnet. Carter understands what this document actually allows him to do." Rebecca Lawson asked Daniel to join us in the small conference room beside the nurse's station. "I stayed with Mom at first, but Mom squeezed my hand and said, 'No, I want Emily there.'" Rebecca looked directly at my mother. "Not at Daniel. Not at the folder. Not at anyone else. Mrs. Carter." "Is that your choice?" Mom nodded. "Yes." That small exchange mattered because it was the first time all day. Someone asked my mother what she wanted before asking what the paperwork said. Daniel walked in 2 minutes later, still holding his leather folder. But he looked different now. Le certain. More careful. He sat across from Rebecca and placed the folder on the table like a shield. Rebecca opened with one sentence. "Mr. Carter. A medical power of attorney is not a license to override a capable patient." Daniel's jaw moved. "I never said it was—" David slid the printed visitor restriction request across the table. "Then explain why Emily Carter was denied access based on your statement that your mother did not want to see her." Daniel leaned back. "Because she didn't need stress. Emily upsets her." I felt the old anger rise. But Karen touched my arm under the table, reminding me to let the record work. Rebecca turned to Mom. "Mrs. Carter, did Emily upset you by coming to the hospital?" Mom's voice was weak, but clear. "No. Not seeing her upset me." Daniel looked at her then, and for the first time I saw panic break through his polish. "Mom? You were confused." Angela, standing near the door, spoke before anyone else could. She was oriented when she made the request. "I documented it." Rebecca tapped the capacity note in the chart. The attending physician also documented that Mrs. A. Carter was capable of expressing visitor preferences during the relevant period. Daniel opened his folder quickly. "But I am her agent." Rebecca nodded. "When she lacks capacity to make a decision, or when the document's authority applies, it does not allow you to replace her stated wishes because you disagree with them." The room went very quiet. Daniel looked down at the paper as if the words might rearrange themselves for him. David placed another document beside it. "This is the internal communication that told staff all family contact should go through you." Did you request that Daniel hesitated 1 second too long? "I may have said communication should be simplified." Rebecca's voice stayed even. Simplified for whom Daniel didn't answer. Moan did. For him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But everyone heard it. He wanted to decide who heard what. Daniel turned toward her. "I was protecting you." Mom closed her eyes. "No. Danielle? You were protecting your version of me." That sentence hit the room harder than any accusation I could have made. Daniel's face flushed. "After everything I've done," he said. "Appointments. Forms. Calls. Insurance. Emily wasn't here for that." I looked at him. But Mom answered again. "Emily came when I asked. You made sure she couldn't reach me." Rebecca wrote something in her notes. David added one final page to the table, the call log showing Mom's requests. Angela's nursing note. And the access denial. Paper by paper. Daniel's story shrank until there was almost nothing left but the sound of him breathing too loudly. Rebecca finally closed the folder. Effective immediately. The visitor restriction is void. All care decisions will be confirmed directly with Mrs. Wen Carter while she has capacity. Any future use of the medical power of attorney will be reviewed under hospital policy. Mr. Carter. You may remain involved only to the extent Mrs. Porting, 710. Carter permits. Then she looked at Mom. Mrs. Carter. Do you want Daniel to remain your medical agent? Daniel stared at her. For once. He could not answer for her. Mom looked at him for a long moment. Then looked at me. Not alone. She said. I want, Emily added. Daniel's hand tightened around his folder. Rebecca nodded. Then we'll begin the paperwork. Rebecca Lawson did not hand anyone a pen immediately. Instead, she closed Daniel's folder, placed it at the far end of the conference table, and slid a completely different packet toward my mother. Mrs. Carter, she said gently. A medical power of attorney can only be changed if you are making the decision voluntarily and you still have the capacity to do so. Before we do anything, I need to ask you several questions without anyone answering for you. Daniel shifted in his chair. Is that really necessary? Rebecca looked at him calmly. Hospital policy requires it. More importantly, your mother deserves it. For the first time since I arrived at St. Mary's, every procedure in the room existed to protect my mother instead of protecting the paperwork someone else was holding. Angela helped Mom sit a little higher in bed while Rebecca began the assessment. Can you tell me your full name, Linda Marie Carter? Do you know where you are? St. Mary's Medical Center. Do you know today's date? Mom answered correctly, after thinking for a moment. Then Rebecca asked the question that mattered most. Can you explain, in your own words, why you want to change your medical power of attorney? Mom didn't look at Daniel. She looked directly at me. Because I trusted one child to help me, she said quietly. And he decided helping meant speaking instead of listening. The room fell silent. Rebecca wrote every word exactly as Mom said it. Daniel finally leaned forward. Mom? You're exhausted. This isn't the right time. Rebecca raised one hand before Mom could respond. Mr. Carter. From this point forward, I need your mother to answer without interruption. Daniel sought back, clearly unhappy. But he knew arguing with the ethics committee in front of a compliance officer would only make things worse. Mom took a slow breath. I still want Daniel involved, she said. I looked at her in surprise. Daniel straightened immediately. Then, she continued. But I never wanted him to decide who could love me. Daniel's shoulders dropped again. Even now, Mom wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to restore balance. Rebecca placed a new authorization form on the bedside table. Unlike Daniel's copy, this one contained blank spaces, waiting for my mother's own instructions instead of assumptions made by someone else. Mrs. Carter, Rebecca said, you have several options. You may keep your current agent, replace your current agent, or appoint more than one person to act together. Mom didn't even look at the choices for very long. I want both of my children listed, she said. Neither of them alone. Rebecca nodded. Joint authority, Mom answered firmly. Yes. If a decision affects my family, then my family should hear it together. David Ellis smiled faintly for the first time all day. That arrangement also creates accountability, he said. Major decisions require communication rather than assumption. Daniel looked frustrated. That'll slow everything down. Rebecca met his eyes. Sometimes slowing down prevents harm. Karen quietly handed my mother a pair of reading glasses. Angela placed a clipboard across her lap. Before signing anything, Mom read every page herself. She stopped twice to ask questions about the wording. Rebecca answered each one patiently. No one rushed her. No one summarized. No one told her what she should want. Watching that process, I realized this was probably the first time in months someone had treated my mother's voice as more important than everyone else's convenience. When Mom finally reached for the pen, Her hand shook badly enough that Angela steadied the clipboard. Mom looked up at me before writing her name. "Emily," she whispered. "Promise me something." I squeezed her hand gently. "Anything." She smiled sadly. "If I ever forget who I am one day." "Don't ever let paperwork become more important than kindness." Tears filled my eyes. "I promise." She signed her name slowly. One careful letter at a time. Rebecca signed as the witnessing representative. Angela signed as the clinical witness. David added the compliance acknowledgement. Pour signature. 4 people making sure one woman's wishes could never again be replaced by someone else's confidence. As Rebecca collected the completed forms, a hospital clerk knocked softly on the open door. "Excuse me," she said. "There's someone downstairs asking for copies of Mrs. Bated, ever Mrs. Bated, Carter's updated authorization." Rebecca frowned. "Who?" The clerk looked down at her note. "An attorney. He says he represents Daniel Carter." The room became perfectly still. Daniel's face drained of color. "I didn't call an attorney," he said too quickly. David looked at him without speaking. Rebecca closed the folder, placed her hand firmly on top of it, and said, "Then before anyone receives anything, I think it's time we find out exactly who he's representing." The word attorney changed the room faster than any alarm could have. 1 second. We were watching my mother's updated authorization form being placed into a hospital folder. The next. Every person in the room seemed to understand that Daniel's story was not only falling apart inside the hospital, it was trying to protect itself from outside the building. Rebecca Lawson kept her hand on the completed form and looked at Daniel. "You didn't call an attorney." Daniel shook his head too quickly. "No. I spoke to someone yesterday. But I didn't tell him to come here." David Ellis wrote that down without looking up. Daniel noticed. "Why are you writing that down?" David said calmly. "Because accuracy matters." Rebecca asked the clerk to bring the attorney to the conference room, but not to release any records. "No copies," she said. "No verbal confirmation beyond the fact that we will meet with him." Then she turned to my mother. "Mrs. Carter, do you want this attorney involved in your care decisions?" Mom's face looked pale, but her voice was steady. "No." Rebecca nodded. "Do you know his name?" Mom shook her head. "No." Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. "Mom, he was just supposed to help me understand what my responsibilities were." I looked at him. "Before or after you used those responsibilities to keep me out?" He didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a man in a gray suit entered with a briefcase and a polite smile that disappeared when he saw not just Daniel, but the patient advocate, compliance officer, ethics committee representative, charge nurse, and my mother sitting upright with a signed form in front of her. "I'm Alan Pierce," he said. "I represent Daniel Carter in matters concerning his mother's medical authority." Rebecca gestured toward the chair but did not smile. "Mr. Pierce, Linda Carter is capable of speaking for herself at this time. She has just updated her medical authorization with witnesses present clattering. She has also stated she does not want you involved in her care decisions." Alan glanced at Daniel. Daniel looked away. The attorney opened his briefcase. "My concern is that Mrs. Carter may be under pressure." Rebecca slid the capacity assessment notes across the table. "That concern has been addressed." She answered capacity questions, explained her decision in her own words, and signed with clinical and compliance witnesses present. Alan looked at the page, then at Mom. "Mrs. Carter, do you understand what you signed?" Mom met his eyes. "Yes, I signed something to stop my son from deciding who gets to love me." The room went silent. Alan closed his mouth. David then placed the visitor restriction report on the table. "Since you're here, Mr. Pierce, You should also understand that this hospital is conducting a formal review of a restriction entered without proper verification of the patient's wishes. Alan's expression sharpened. Was my client accused of misconduct? Rebecca said. Your client presented himself as the authority for a restriction the patient did not request. Angela added quietly. The patient requested Emily twice. I documented it. Alan looked at Daniel again. And this time there was no confidence in his face. Only calculation. Mom leaned back against her pillows. Exhausted, but clear. Daniel, she said. I wanted help. I did not want a gatekeeper. Daniel's face twisted. You don't understand how much I've done. Mom nodded slowly. I do. That is why I trusted you. And that is why this hurts. For the first time, Daniel looked less angry than wounded. But wounded people can still do damage. Alan closed his briefcase and said, I'll need to confer with my client privately. Rebecca stood. You may confer with him. You may not access Mrs. Carter's updated documents without her written permission. Mom whispered. He doesn't have it. Rebecca looked at Alan. Then that answers that. Alan Pierce and Daniel were given a small consultation room at the end of the hall, but they did not stay inside for long. Through the glass panel near the nurse's station, I saw Daniel pacing while Alan stood still with one hand on his briefcase, speaking in short sentences. That was when I realized Daniel's attorney had come expecting a frightened sister and a confused mother. Instead, he had walked into a room full of records. Nursing notes, visitor logs, audit history, capacity assessment, signed authorization, a sealed letter. Daniel had always been strongest in private conversations where he could control what each person heard. He looked much smaller under fluorescent lights with everything printed in order. Rebecca asked Mom if she wanted to rest before continuing. Mom shook her head. No, she whispered. I want this finished while I still know what I'm saying. Angela adjusted her pillows and offered water. Karen stayed beside the bed, taking notes. David returned from the compliance office with a draft report clipped inside a blue hospital folder. This is preliminary, he said, but the findings are clear enough to explain. He placed the folder where Mom could see it. The title across the top read, Patient Rights and Visitor Restriction Review. For 2 days, Daniel had used hospital language to keep me away. Now the hospital was using its own language to correct him. David read the summary aloud. Finding one patient, Linda Carter, retained capacity to express visitor preferences during the period in question. Finding 2 patient verbally requested Emily Carter be notified and allowed to visit. Finding 3 visitor restriction was entered based on representation by medical power of attorney agent without required patient verification. Finding 4 restriction resulted in improper denial of access to requested visitor. Each sentence landed quietly, but I felt the weight of them. Improper denial of access. Requested visitor. Patient retained capacity. Those were not emotional words. That was why they mattered. Daniel came back into the room before David finished the recommendations. Alan followed. Now, far more careful than before. I'd like to clarify. Alan said. My client believed he was acting in his mother's best interest. Rebecca looked up. Best interest does not allow an agent to contradict a capable patient's stated wishes. Alan nodded, accepting the point because the documents left him little room to do anything else. Daniel looked at Mom. I was trying to keep things calm. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You kept things quiet. Daniel. That is not the same. I looked down at my hands because that sentence hurt both of us. My family had confused quiet with peace for years. Then Karen opened the sealed letter again. The one Mom had written before the visitor restriction became real. Mrs. Carter, she asked. Do you want this letter included in the ethics review? Daniel stiffened. Mom. Please. Mom looked at him. then at me. Yes, she said. Not to punish him. To protect the truth. Karen made a copy and placed it behind Angela's nursing note. The order mattered. Mom's voice. Nurse's note. Hospital low. Compliance finding. No one document had saved us. The chain had. David read the final recommendation. The hospital will document the restriction as entered in error and removed future visitor restrictions for Mrs. Light. Carter must be confirmed directly with her while she has capacity. All care communication must include both appointed agents under the updated authorization. Mr. Carter may not unilaterally exclude Emily Carter from visitation or communication. Daniel sat down like his legs had finally given up on pride. For once. He did not argue. Alan placed one hand on the table and said quietly, Daniel, you need to listen. Mom turned toward him. You were still my son this morning. She said, You are still my son now. But you will not be the keeper of my voice anymore. Daniel's face crumpled for half a second before he looked away. I did not know whether it was shame, anger, or grief. Maybe all three. But I knew this. The folder in his hand no longer worked. The hospital had taken the paper he used as a wall and turned it into a window everyone could see through. Daniel did not speak for several minutes after Mom said he would no longer be the keeper of her voice. He sat at the conference table with his hands folded around a folder that had lost all its power. For most of my life, Daniel had known exactly what to say when a room turned against him. He could make himself sound tired instead of guilty, protective instead of controlling, reasonable instead of cruel. But now, there were too many witnesses, too many notes, too many signatures, and too many people who had heard Mom speak for herself. For once, there was no hallway version for him to rewrite. Alan Pierce leaned toward him and said quietly, Daniel, the best thing you can do now is cooperate. Daniel looked at him, then at Mom. So I'm the villain now. His voice cracked on the last word, which made the whole thing sadder. Mom closed her eyes for a moment. No, she said. You're my son. But you were wrong. Daniel shook his head. I was trying to protect you from stress. Mom opened her eyes again. You became the stress. That sentence seemed to hit him harder than the ethics report. He looked at me then, anger and shame mixing across his face. And you're enjoying this, I almost answered. But Mom squeezed my hand. She answered for me. No. Emily came because I asked for her. You made that look like an attack. Rebecca Lawson placed the updated authorization form on the table between us. Mrs. Carter's care team has been notified. Going forward, both Emily and Daniel will receive medical updates unless Mrs. Carter changes that instruction. Neither party may restrict the other's access without direct patient confirmation or appropriate clinical justification. Daniel stared at the form. So what am I supposed to do? Karen Mitchell answered gently. Listen before you decide. It was such a simple sentence that the room went quiet around it. Listen, before you decide. Maybe that was all Mom had wanted from the beginning. Angela returned with discharge planning notes. Because hospitals move forward, even when families are falling apart. Mom was not going home that day. But the doctors believed she could transfer to a rehabilitation unit within the week if her condition stayed stable. Daniel immediately reached for the papers, then stopped himself. Slowly. He pushed them toward Mom instead. It was the first useful thing he had done all day. Mom looked at me. Read them with me. I nodded and pulled my chair closer. Daniel sat across from us, watching while I read the rehab options aloud, and Angela explained what each one meant. For the first time, Daniel had to hear the information at the same time I did. He hated it. But he heard it. Before leaving, Alan asked if Daniel could speak to Mom privately. Rebecca looked to Mom. Not Daniel. Mom thought for a moment, then said, 5 minutes. With the door open, that small condition said everything. Daniel stood beside her bed while I waited in the hallway with Karen. I could not hear all of it, but I heard enough. I didn't want to lose control. Daniel said. Mom answered. You were never supposed to control me. His shoulders dropped. I thought Emily would make you choose. Mom's voice was weak but clear. You made me choose when you locked the door. When Daniel came out, he did not look at me at first. Then he stopped and said, I shouldn't have told them you weren't allowed. It was not a full apology. It did not cover the lobby, the security officers, the lies, or the 2 days I spent believing my mother rejected me. But it was the first crack in the wall. I said, No, you shouldn't have. He nodded once and walked toward the elevators with Alan beside him. I watched him go. Not with victory, but with exhaustion. Some truths don't feel like winning. They just feel like finally being allowed to breathe. That evening, Mom asked Angela to hand me the sealed letter to keep. You already heard it, I said. Mom smiled faintly. Then keep it for the days when you forget. I slipped it into my bag beside the copy of the ethics report and the updated authorization form. 3 papers. 3 different kinds of proof. One proved she had asked for me. One proved the hospital believed her. One proved Daniel would never again speak alone in her name. As I sat beside Mom's bed and listened to the rain tapping softly against the hospital window, I understood what had really been restored that day. Not just my access to a hospital room. Not just my place in a family argument. My mother's voice had been returned to her. And for once, everyone had been forced to listen. 3 weeks later, Mom was transferred to a rehabilitation center with both Daniel's name and mine listed on the care communication form. It was a small change on paper. Just 2 names printed beside one another. But it changed everything. Nurses called both of us. Doctors explained updates to both of us. Discharge plans were emailed to both of us. Daniel hated the slowness of it at first. The waiting. The shared decisions. The fact that he could no longer walk into a hallway and turn his version of events into policy. But little by little, he learned what the rest of us had been forced to learn years earlier. Being trusted is not the same thing as being in control. Mom and I did not become magically close. Stories like this don't end with one hospital room fixing a lifetime. There were still old wounds between us. Old arguments. 2 years, when she had let Daniel be louder, because it was easier than asking him to be kinder. But something real changed after St. Ada. Mary's. She stopped letting him answer for her. When she was tired. She said she was tired. When she wanted me to visit. She told the nurse herself. When Daniel tried to summarize what she really meant, she would lift one finger and say, I can still speak. Every time she said it, I thought of Angela's nursing note, Karen's patient advocacy file, David's compliance report, and Rebecca's ethics review. Paper had not replaced love. It had protected love from being rewritten. Daniel apologized once more. Months later, in the parking lot outside the rehab center, it was awkward and incomplete, but more honest than the first one. I thought if I controlled everything, nothing bad could happen. He said. I looked at him for a long moment. Something bad did happen. You made Mom afraid her own daughter wouldn't come. He nodded and looked away. I know. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't. But I did say, then don't do it again. Sometimes that is all forgiveness can be at first. Not a warm ending. Just a boundary with the door cracked open. 6 months after the hospital incident, Mom came to my apartment for lunch. She walked slowly with a cane. But she carried her own purse and insisted on bringing a lemon cake from the bakery she liked. After we ate, she asked if I still had the letter. I opened the drawer beside my desk and took out the envelope with her handwriting on it. Emily. Just my name. She touched it gently and said, I wrote that because I was scared he would make people believe I didn't want you. I said, he almost did. She nodded. But he didn't. Then she looked at me, eyes clear and tired. Because you came back. I thought about the lobby, the rain, the security officers, the humiliation of being treated like a stranger. I almost didn't. I admitted. Mom reached across the table and held my hand. I'm glad you did. I keep 3 documents now in a folder labeled Mom's Voice. The letter she wrote before surgery, the nursing note Angela entered when Mom asked for me, and the updated authorization form that made sure no one could speak alone in her name again. I don't keep them because I want to relive the pain. I keep them because some families are very good at pretending the hurt never happened. Records are not bitterness. Sometimes records are the only reason the truth survives long enough to heal. People ask me whether Daniel lost. I don't think of it that way. Control lost. Silence lost. The habit of believing the most confident person in the room lost. My mother did not need me to rescue her from death or illness or fear. She needed someone to ask the question Daniel hoped no one would ask. What does she want? That question gave her back the one thing every patient deserves. Every parent deserves. Every person deserves when they are weak and surrounded by people holding forms. A voice. The last time I visited Mom at rehab, Angela happened to be working that floor. She smiled when she saw me and said, You're on the visitor list now. I smiled back and answered, I know. Then I walked into my mother's room without asking Daniel, without explaining myself to security, without carrying shame like an ID badge. Mom looked up from her chair by the window and reached for me. That was the ending I needed. Not money. Not revenge. Not even an apology big enough to cover the years. Just a room I was allowed to enter. A mother who had asked for me. And enough proof to make sure no one could ever tell me otherwise. A hospital hallway can make the wrong person sound official. Give someone a folder, a calm voice, and a few medical words. And suddenly pain starts waiting outside the door while confidence walks in first. For 2 days, Daniel's certainty was treated like my mother's truth. But certainty is not consent. A form is not a voice. And a person lying in a hospital bed does not become less human because someone else is louder at the nurse's station. What saved us was not anger. It was the question nobody had asked carefully enough, what does Linda Carter want? That question turned the whole room around. It reminded everyone that care is not control. Protection is not isolation. And family authority means nothing when it stops listening to the person it claims to protect. My mother did not need a champion who spoke over her. She needed witnesses brave enough to hear her. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.